Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second event of our DRCLAS Film Series, Are We There Yet? A film series on queer futures, where we'll discuss the film A Fantastic Woman by Sebastián Lelio. Welcome, Sebastián. It is an honor to have you here with us tonight. My name is Marcela Ramos. I am the program manager for the Art, Film, and Culture program at DRCLAS, the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies at Harvard University. The discussion tonight will be moderated by Adri Rodríguez Ríos, doctoral student from the Department of Literatures and Romance Languages at Harvard, and Jorge Sánchez Cruz, visiting assistant professor at Harvard University. For the benefit of time, we will copy their bios on the chat, but I just want to mention that this is the first time that we invite a professor to join the respondent or moderator team. So we're very excited about this new version. And thank you, Jorge, for accepting the invitation and being here with us as well. I'll let our moderators introduce Sebastián and tell us more about the year-long film series. I will only mention that one of DRCLAS' goals is that our students actively participate in the center's programming and that this programming supports their academic research. So we're thrilled with this collaboration with Adri and Laura Pérez, who are the curators of the series. Before I hand the mic, please let me cover a couple of housekeeping items very quickly. First, we are recording today's session and it will be available on our YouTube channel shortly after today's session. We'll also send you an email with to all the registrants. In the chat, we've added links to our online calendars as well as social media channels. Please follow us there for the most up-to-date information about the upcoming events and the rest of this series, which actually continues in spring semester. And finally, we'd love to hear from you. So during today's presentation, if you have a question at any time during the presentation, please feel free to send it through the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. And we'll be answering the questions at the end of the session. Thank you. So, Adri, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marcela. Thank you, everyone who's here today. First of all, I wanted to start to mention a little bit and share with you some of the insights of this film series. So Laura, who is the co-curator with me of this film series, that is titled Are We There Yet? A film series on queer futures, came into existence because as we were preparing our perspectives for the dissertation, we came to the realization that many of the questions and theoretical frameworks that we were using aligned with film, with visual media, and along with queerness, which is something we're invested in on our research and our pedagogy as well. So with that in mind, and using some of the frameworks from Jose Esteban Muñoz, Queerness is Not Yet Here, Queerness Utopia as well, we designed this film series to sort of like explore the ideas of queer futurity and queerness as a way of, as a timeline that is not linear, but circular, and sort of like invites us to think and overthink and rethink and reshape the ways of how queerness is presented in the future. So with that in mind, I feel really grateful to have for Sebastián, who's here with us today, and I will just briefly read some of his bio. So Sebastián Lelio is a Chilean filmmaker. We all know, most of us watched the film today. Three of his most recognized films are La Sagrada Familia from 2005, Navidad from 2009, and El Año del Tigre from 2011. More recently, he released A Fantastic Woman in 2017, and who was an international success. It was premiered at the Berlinale and took home the Silver Bear for Best Screenplay, as well as the Teddy Award. Later, the film obtained the Goya Award, the Independent Spirit Award, and it became the first Chilean feature film to win an Oscar as Best Foreign Language Film. So with that, I really feel grateful for Sebastián for being here with us today and for sharing with us and the world some of your work that we're gonna be discussing about today in Una Mujer Fantástica, Fantastic Woman. With that said in mind, I will let Jorge start with the session of questions and start with our let us start our conversation. Jorge, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Adri, and thank you, Sebastián, for being here with us. It is a pleasure and an honor to be in conversation with you. As you probably saw in the introduction, in the website, I'm a visiting assistant professor in the Department of Romance Languages and Literatures, where I teach courses on trans and queer theories and aesthetics and visual culture. I have a short piece to read, and then I'll jump up with some questions for Sebastián. So in March of 2018, Daniela Vega, the main protagonist of A Fantastic Woman, issued a public statement at the Moneda, the Chilean presidential palace. This was during the Michelle Bachelet presidency. She states, and I quote, "Trans people have existed since day one in human existence, and there comes a point where humanity creates gestures to comprehend themselves. And film, like art, attempts to better understand human beings, their capacities, their dreams, and their disillusionments, and the limits. And this film proposes to see where the limits of empathy are, which bodies can be inhabited, which forms of love could be attainable, and who puts those barriers," she ends, end of quotation. Indeed, Una Mujer Fantástica, A Fantastic Woman, is a film that diagnoses the limits of representation and of citizenship for trans persons, the criminalization of transness, and the politics of mourning. By operating at this crossroads, the film questions the normative frames of legibility that deny minoritarian subjects, specifically trans people, from the right to be and the right to mourn, forcing them to mourn in private, as we see in the film, at the margins. It is through the figure of Marina that us, as spectators, can see, feel, and engage with the limits of empathy, the exclusionary practices that marginalize trans people, but also, I think, most importantly, the daily endurance of trans people despite anti-trans sentiment. In that sense, Marina is fueled by a desire to mourn her loved one and a desire to inhabit and be the fantastic woman that she is. So in conversation with Daniela's speech at the Moneda from 2018, I want to start off with a few general questions about the film, Sebastián. One is, in what context did the film emerge? And did you see the film make an impact on the passing of the gender identity law in 2018 under Sebastián Piñera's presidency? So just general questions about the creation and effects.
Well, thank you for having me. We started writing the film in 2014, and it was quite, of course, an intuitive process. Like any creative process, we were, with my co-writer, Gonzalo Massa, we were, I think, moving forward clumsily and blinded. And, but there was always something about the subject, the idea of making a film about this character, Marina, and finding an attitude that probably wasn't by then the most, I guess, the most common attitude, because at least my feeling back then was like, this film, if it's filmed as this subject is represented today, I said to myself back then, it should be filmed with the raw light of social realism. It should be filmed handheld with a sort of like hyper independent and guerrilla style. And there was always something very moving about the idea of filming Marina because she deserves a film, because she is a film, you know, and it's not, I didn't want the film to condescend, but I wanted the film to somehow, you know, portray multi-dimensional, different layers and aspects, some of them luminous, some of them dark. But in general, I wanted to film her like one would film a great star. And not because I was faking it, it's because I thought that that was the right way to do it intuitively. So yeah, that's, and what happened with the film, and I guess with me and with people that made it, is that when we were ready to release it in Berlin Film Festival 2017, I would say that that was the time where somehow the presence of trans people and in popular culture seemed to explode in many different ways. So I was kind of like surprised by the synchronicity and following the film. I was, you know, kind of like following what was happening with the film and not, quite surprised by the kind of like the timing in which the film appeared. And to finish, you were asking about the context. I remember like a few weeks before releasing, I mean, showing the film for the first time in Berlin, a National Geographic special edition appeared, and it was called I can't remember the exact title, but it was like the changing landscape of sexual identity. That was the kind of like the name of the issue, and you could see 22, 21 silhouettes, and you would have like in Spanish we call that una infografía. So you would have a number, and you could say, oh, this is one possible way of being and existing. This is a different one. So it was all about trying to, I guess, contribute to the nomenclature, to the somehow unexisting nomenclature, at least in popular culture, about all these ways of being. And I remember looking at the Instagram account of this magazine, and there were like literally like thousands of commentaries, and half of them were enthusiastic, and they were considering that somehow that was inspiring for reasons that many of them could not yet explain, but there was something beautiful about it. But then the other half, of course I'm simplifying, were very violent commentaries. So I guess that was the context. I'm not saying that it changed. I'm just saying that I was paying a lot of attention to it, and that was the context in which we were releasing the film. and also I'd like to say in this conversation, because I'm a bit intimidated, because you study this, you know, dedicate your life to these subjects, and I want to say that I'm white, heterosexual human being, man, I guess, and that's the place I'm talking from. I don't have any other authority, and I'm not claiming any, and that I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Sebastián, for the response. I really love when you mentioned that you wanted to portray a multidimensional and multi-layer. I mean, I hate the word representation, but the manifestation of this, what I see it to be a very complex character, right? And you do a very good job, I think, or the film does a very good job at kind of like giving us the different vectors or the different mechanisms that condition Marina, right? Her personal, her family, she's sort of ostracized, the family of Orlando who ostracized her as well. The way she goes into this medical evaluation, right, forced medical evaluation, which has to do a lot about the imposing of biological biology or science as a juridical form of evaluation, but it's also violent, right? So we see all the different things that go around her, right, which I think hints or kind of reinforces what you say about the multidimensional, multi-layers of the social realism that you were trying to portray. But there's also other elements that I don't think are from social realism, specifically the haunting of Orlando, right? I'm wondering if you can comment. I mean, my students ask me this all the time, like, why does Orlando keep on showing up haunting Marina? What is this technique supposed to tell us? What is supposed to be telling Marina, etc. I don't know if you can.
Well, I guess that's precisely my point. Is not. I don't consider the film to be a really realistic film. In Spanish, we, as you know, we use the same word for genre and gender, which is género. And at some point in the process of writing the script, I was trying to find correlation between the film's form and its subject of study and its protagonist. And I wanted the film's identity to somehow resonate and be deeply related to what the film was observing, studying, following, and the idea of making a transgénero film merged, in the sense of I wanted the film's identity to be ungraspable, and kind of like I wanted the film. I was trying for the film not to be easily too quickly reduced to any definition. So the film starts like a kind of like a classical melodrama, like a film from the 40s, and then it turns into the film about an adult man, and then it's a funeral film, and then it's the film about a woman, and then it becomes a ghost story, and suddenly it flirts with the musical, or it has a sort of like a musical number, and precisely maybe trying to operate against the idea of the aesthetical territory that this theme should inhabit. The film, the character is suddenly like facing a windstorm a la Buster Keaton, so to me, finding that connection between género as in gender and género as in genre was from a cinematic point of view, a door that opened into some sort of freedom. And that's when I felt that I was somehow finding a sort of like secret connection with Marina. It's like the two sides of a coin. It's not, how can a film not be its character? But then that somehow can happen sometimes. So among all those gestures, if you can say that, one of the things that was suddenly possible because of the elasticity of the expressive territory was precisely that the idea of this presence. Is it a ghost? Is it her imagination? Is he really there? Etc. was suddenly natural. And it was quite surprising to see or to explore and see how elastic, precisely, again, the canvas that was being created was. I don't know if that answers your question in any.
Yes, I mean, that's something that I have been thinking also about, how the aesthetic, the film as aesthetic, is an aesthetic resistance, right, to be labeled or identified under a specific genre. And we see this in Latin American film, right? There's different genres, as you mentioned in the film, rejects to be named or identified as something specifically, right? Yeah, I think going along that, I was also thinking, I mean, this is probably my last question, and then maybe Adri, you wanna, maybe you wanna make a question. You wanna make a question. Going along about the aesthetic, right, and the film as aesthetic practice. I'm wondering if you can comment about if art, right, going along what Daniela Vega mentions at her speech, right? Can art and aesthetic or the aesthetic regime operate as a legal injunction, right? I'm thinking how when the movie became so popular, right, it made also apparent, right, the right for trans people or non-normative people to be able to attain rights, change their name, etc. So I'm wondering if the film as an aesthetic practice is a legal injunction that mobilized in some ways through affects, movement of bodies, the passing of the gender identity law later in December of 2018?
I mean, that's such an interesting question. And again, regarding what I said about from where I'm talking, that's precisely the place from where I made the film. It's the trans cause wasn't my cause. You know what I mean? My connection was through a different channel, if you allow me to say that. You know what I mean? It's like my responsibility was to try to make hopefully a film that is complex enough so it can maybe trigger a response in the viewer that can be rich and challenging, and mostly for reasons that maybe are not too easy to understand, moving. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that I wasn't thinking at all when I was making the film in the more concrete dimension of its potential contribution. I was just trying to make a film that hopefully was as complex and beautiful as its character. Now, how then, if the film had not existed within this canvas that we were talking about, within this idea of being transgénero, would the film have had any impact? I think now the two things, the film's impact and the film's identity, and the series of aesthetical and ethical decisions that are condensed in the film, you cannot separate them. They are one and the same thing. And it's kind of like, it would be a complete irresponsibility if I said, my plan worked. You know what I mean? My only plan was to hopefully make a film with enough artistic dignity. Stop, you know, that's it. Then we were a witness. We were witnesses of what happened. And we chased the film for a year, and we were running behind the film as the film was gaining more and more support and somehow recognition. And of course, in Chile being a very conservative, or at least apparently conservative country, the elite, of course, has always been very, very conservative and very traditional. It was quite a journey to see how, when the film was released in 2017, a lot of discussion emerged in the Chilean society about the film, and the conservative sides of society said, this is, again, you know, all the things that I guess we are all used to hear. This is not, this is ideology, this is people that should be locked in, the God created man and woman, so etc., etc. And we would never, like, over our dead bodies, we would legislate or somehow campaign for a gender identity bill. And a year after that, the film won the Oscar, and suddenly it was somehow, the discussion was unavoidable, but also like a year of conversations and confrontations and columns, and I guess the film finding a way into society's texture had happened too. And you know, that idea that there's nothing more powerful than an idea which time has come. That was the feeling I had, like, this is happening because maybe there was a lot of intuition and instinct, if you want, maybe artistic instinct behind the making of the film, but also the film belongs to its time, to the time in which it was released. But because, again, when it was being written, we were like, what are we doing? And then I don't want to like fall into small anecdotes, but we had the dilemma of flying right back to Chile after the Oscar and presenting the Oscar to President Bachelet, a progressive, you know, woman, yet in power, a few days before the new right-wing government arrived into power, into office. So we did that. We ran and we showed, you know, we presented the Oscar to Michelle Bachelet, and that's when the the night when Daniela said what you quoted at the beginning of the conversation, Jorge, and after that night, before leaving office, Michelle Bachelet ordered somehow Congress to urgently discuss the gender identity bill, which has been at that time dormant in Congress for years. So the right wing were somehow in this position of being somehow forced, if you want, to having to discuss. But by then, I think some education had happened, and some people that had some spiritual elasticity had opened their minds to the possibility of contemplating, the idea of, could this gender identity bill be necessary? And 6 months after that, or a few months after that, the first gender identity bill was being discussed and approved later on in Congress. So yeah, the film did play a role in that. And I was one of the most surprised witnesses of the process.
Thank you, Sebastián, for that answer. And I have a follow-up question that comes with what you just said, and about the impact of the film itself, such as the anecdote you just shared with us. And it comes with the fact that the film does not fall into the common tropes of queerness and death. That is often a trope. It's often the story of transgender people dying at the end of the film, or transgender people or queer people in general being killed. And we have a long history of movies doing that. And the film sort of like shifts that narrative and transform Marina into what we can tell as the spectators as a recognized singer at the end of the film, right? So with that, it comes with the impact of the film comes with the fact that the story sort of like shift the dialogue that was having other queer films at the time. And with that, I want to ask you about how do you come about the story itself? Not the ideas or the schemes of it, but the story itself, the creation of the script, the romance, the tenderness that is read through the gestures of Marina, the violence also that she goes through. And what were you imagining at the moment, the creation of the story, and how your mind has shifted from the moment of creation to the release up until today?
I mean, it happens, you don't realize when it's happening. It's, I mean, a very also responsible answer to this is like, yeah, I've been out my entire life. Somehow I had been preparing to make a film like this, and you don't decide to suddenly, execute an idea in an isolated way from your biography, or and also like the creative process is quite muddy. It's quite misty. It's like moving forward in a highway with the lights of your car on, but you can't see too much ahead in the road, but you just keep going. What I'm trying to say is that intuition plays a big role. So there was a big amount of emotion. There was something always very moving and exciting about creating this portrait about a character that somehow should be not at the center according to the mainstream. So that was one thing. How moving and tempting it was to imagine the film being seen in the public square, if you know what I'm trying to say, in the public arena. So a lot of emotion, but at the same time, ideas, you know, like I really wanted to hopefully bring the viewer the possibility of oscillating between different perspectives on on ways to see Marina. And if you think of the film, you can think of the film like this, and it's an interesting way to see it, because you have all these characters surrounding Marina that are somehow, again, maybe just like the viewer with the film, trying to define her, trying to put a finger on her and say, oh, this is a melodrama, this is a character study. In the case of Marina, you know, is she legitimate? Is she crazy? Is she what is her gender? All the things that all the characters around her are asking. And I wanted for the viewer to have room and time enough to ponder which, if any of those or them, if they felt more connected to any of these possible perspectives, and then offer them the possibility of connecting with Marina beyond definitions, like connecting with her emotionally, like not through the intellect, but maybe in a more direct, profound, urgent way. So if the viewer at the end of the day wanted her to put it in simple, to be okay, to prevail, then that was an interesting journey for any viewer, but especially for a viewer that had prejudices. Because if you find yourself really connecting, then you can start dismantling the preconceptions that somehow at some point, either by class, education, or any other form of knowledge transmitted by default, was existing in you. So to without at all with any intention of being pedagogical, but more, I guess, to offer the viewer the possibility to exercise their spiritual elasticity. And especially if there was something, I always imagined like someone that was very phobic, watching the film, and by the end of the film, wanting her to, from a place that is not intellectual on the first place, wanting her to prevail, and feeling that existence had the right to get to the place where she was getting to. I always thought that always was very moving to me, as an idea, as a, if you want, as a mission for the film.
And one of the missions, I will just ask this last question myself, and then I want to remind the audience that the floor is open in the Q&A options down below. We're starting to receive questions, so we will just read them shortly. But just one question that is crucial for Laura and myself, and probably one of the reasons the film is included in this film series, is that in our research, we work a lot with imagination, with the power of imagination and the power of theorizing from an imaginated way, or from the fantasy in that way. So I wanted to ask you, can you tell us about the title of the film, and in so doing, I would like to invite you to share with us your vision of the power of fantasy in the film. The movie in itself feels very delusional. It's sort of like a dystopia in some way, but that is very present and that actually happens, right? As you were telling us, your playful way with genres, right? Like transgénero. So can you tell us?
Yeah, no, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that, thank you for that question, because one of the things that I thought more people would get, but that was me being, I mean, why would they, was the potential double meaning of the title. Because again, I think you as a viewer get to decide in which way she is fantastic. If she is fantastic as in someone that has extraordinary properties, or if she is fantastic as in someone that is the product of fantasy. And you have the moral dilemma of deciding as a viewer, I mean. So yeah, that was my idea of the title, but I think, and understandably so, everyone thought that it was fantastic in the sense of someone really great. You know what I mean? So that's regarding the title. I also love the titles. There are many titles in the 70s that start with una mujer, like a woman under the influence, a woman is a woman, an unmarried woman. There's something very 70s about it. And I think it's a period in film history that had a real passion for characters and for observing them horizontally, for a type of narration that was lost and confused with them, they were not really seeing them from any identical distance. And that's always that I have been always very, that's something that I have been always very passionate about, you know, not knowing, being confused with them, and trying to observe them, yeah, horizontally somehow, you know. And so that's regarding the title. And then what you say about fantasy, when I was making the film, the world that was being portrayed there didn't precisely exist, at least in the, I would say, popular culture's mind. Like that couple, I don't think many people had seen it. I wonder if they have seen it even today. You know what I mean? Like there was something, you say dystopian, I would say, I always joked with Benjamín Echazarreta, the director of photography of the film, that we were making a hidden sci-fi, you know, and that was in a certain way liberating, because we could then dream and let the film be, and then chase the ideas or concepts that were born after that, if you want, after allowing ourselves to get there. So yeah, maybe first inhabit a world that can be felt, and then you try to sustain it with ideas and concepts. But it can happen in that order, and the limits of what can be imagined will at least determine the limits of what can be thought, or thought about, you know, or conceptualized. If you cannot get there with fantasy or imagination, you will hardly get there just with intellect.
Yes, agree. Thank you, Sebastián. And I'm sure Jorge and I have many more questions to pose to you, but the audience is also starting to share some of their questions. So I'm gonna read the first one. It comes from Holly Jackson and says, I very much enjoy watching Una Mujer Fantástica and analyzing the film with other students in Professor Sánchez Cruz class. I was wondering how you, Sebastián, and Gonzalo Maza went about constructing the character of Marina and the role stories of other Chilean trans women played in the process. How did you come up with the way to present the accurately complex experience of a trans woman like Marina in Santiago?
I mean, once the idea that this story could happen to a trans woman was there, I felt that we had to immediately stop writing. And I felt the urge to, I was back then living in Berlin for a few years. So I was slightly disconnected from what was happening in Santiago and like in the streets. And I didn't know I didn't have any transgender friend back then in Chile. It was something that I was more in contact with in Berlin, but I was kind of like, what are we dreaming about? You know, like, are we, again, is this just a fantasy, or does it have like a real connection into reality? So we met with a few, there's someone singing here. I think like mariachis are singing outside. So if you hear something, someone singing like a serenata. Anyway, so we met with a couple of trans women in order to get more information, to understand what was happening, and I was looking for a consultant, for someone that could walk with us through the process of writing this script. And that's how I met Daniela. They recommended me to meet her, and when I met her, I fell in love with her. I thought she was fantastic, and she agreed to become a consultant. So for a year, we were talking not about the script, but about her life, and talking about her experiences. How was it like to have transitioned in Chile? Again, kind of like the texture of her daily experiences, and somehow all those conversations were making their way into the script. The only thing I knew was that I wasn't able or available to make the film without a transgender actress. And this was, again, a very rough intuition. It was before it was a must. Now, if you even think about it, you would have to really consider it, because now we're in a different cultural moment. But in 2014 and 15, it wasn't that crazy to think that you could make a film about a transgender character with a cisgender actor. My intuition, blind intuition, was that felt really wrong. And I remember thinking back then, it feels like the blackface, you know, when in the beginnings of cinema, white people would play as if they were black, you know, by painting their faces. So to me, it was aesthetically wrong, and therefore ethically wrong. I mean, the two are always connected. Why I was saying that, I forgot. Oh, you were asking me.
It came out from a question from the audience. But in just for the sake of time, we have at least two more to go on to.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I can ask a following, and maybe you can go through one.
Yeah.
We have a question from Felipe Jara. He asks, well, the question is for the three of us, but we'll see. He says, following the example of a fantastic woman, what cause belonging to a historically oppressed group do you think deserves a showcase on the movie theater screens? Or what aspect of the life of a transgender person do you think has not been addressed in films?
That's probably, who's that question for? Should I?
It says the question for the three of us, but I mean, you're welcome to answer.
Well, I guess I kind of like try to answer that question intuitively by making the film. And to complete the previous question, and without trying to avoid this one, once I realized that our dear consultant, and by then already friend, Daniela, could be Marina, could interpret her, I think that was the most important artistic gesture of the film, because then the resonance between Daniela and Marina became the center of the film's, it became the heart of the film. For the viewer, for the film's influence in what, you know, when it was shown, it was a very important decision that somehow allowed or put the film in a different probably dimension, because the camera knows what it's filming. The camera cannot hide the fact that you are filming someone that has a history and a body that carries that. So I guess in a certain way that gesture is my answer to our friend's latest question. No?
Thank you, Sebastián. Just as for me, and really shortly, I think for your question, Felipe, I think we need to include a racial conversation into the panorama of cinema as well. I think we have pending, at least in the Latin American cinema, we have pending a more broad and in-depth conversation about the racial structures that define our society, that including the transgender community. And moving on to the following question, since we're running out of time, Donna Kircher asked us, as we observe the reception of A Fantastic Woman in 2021, we can also look at how it aligns with subsequent products to look at what the future is. According to this film series title, you as a director say you film Marina as a movie star in A Fantastic Woman. Have you followed Daniela Vega's subsequent role, in particular as Elisa in the series La Jauría? If so, what do you think the interplay between Vega's role in your film and La Jauría might be? What does it say about the place of trans women in Chile today?
I mean, I've been following everything that Daniela has been involved in. We are good friends. So first of all, as a friend, I've been really proud and happy to see that she has been working so much and in many different countries and formats and playing different roles and beyond interpreting transgender characters, which is really, really interesting. It's like thinking beyond limitations from that perspective, which is in a certain way so liberating. Then in that sense, yeah, I did watch La Jauría, and I thought it was an interesting TV show, and it's hard for me to try to compare them or analyze them together. I feel it's beyond what I should be doing in this conversation.
Okay, Sebastián, thank you for your answer. We have one final question from Christian Bas. This is what he asks. Hi, Sebastián. Thanks for the conversation. This has been amazing. My name is Christian Bas, president of the Harvard Chilean Association. First of all, I want to thank you for putting Chile in the contemporary cultural panorama. I know that you're an inspiration for many. I want to know your opinion if movies like Una Mujer Fantástica, A Fantastic Woman, have helped encourage people in Chile to have a more positive and inclusive idea towards people from the transgender community.
Thank you for those words. Well, Chile has been in a process of transformation that we're in the middle of it now. We don't know what will happen. It's really like a time that is full of potential. It could go wonderfully great, or it could go really wrong. We don't know, and that speaks of the power of this moment. And now, because it's always easier to connect the dots looking backwards, I see a film like A Fantastic Woman merging from Chile as part of the same process. The popular saying here is that Chile woke up. The question would be, woke up from which dream or sleep, and to what? No, but I would say for sure into an acknowledging of the notion that we either learn to somehow embrace the complexities of life and create political instruments and institutions that can contain that and recognize that, or we will too easily fall into the trap of fascism, and therefore simplification, and therefore brutality. So in a certain way, I don't see what is happening in Chile today as something that is isolated from so many processes that are happening in the world. But doing the exercise of thinking of Chile as a world in its own for a moment, I'd say that since many, many years, the arts and culture had been announcing that things needed to change, and that somehow we were pushing too hard, and we were heading into a dead end. And in that context, I think A Fantastic Woman now today can be better placed as one of the many gestures coming from different dimensions of society that were at the same time denouncing something that needed to change, but also contributing with some sort of emotion, with some sort of drive, with some sort of intuition of that maybe didn't have yet words to describe that feeling, that thought, that fantasy, to use your word, Adri, but that was somehow there as a, let's say, preconceptual reality, or as a I'd like to think as a feeling, as a collective intuition, even as something that is vibrating, that is claiming to be said. Because if it's said, then we can maybe think about it. We can name it together. We can use it as a common nomenclature. If it's inhabited, if it's presented, if it's said, then it becomes, then we can all use it. it becomes a tool.
One final quick question, Sebastián, if you don't mind. It's probably like a yes or no answer. I know you did reimagined Gloria from 2013 to Gloria Bell in 2018. I was wondering if you will be in the future interested or know about reimagining Una Mujer Fantástica.
No, I mean, I think I'm done reimagining my own films. I really enjoyed the process of finding a new incarnation to Gloria, but I don't think that will be the case with a fantastic woman, with Una Mujer Fantástica.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastián. Thank you, Jorge. And thank you everyone for coming in today. This was our last question for today. I encourage you to stay tuned for the spring series of the film series as well. We'll be coming up with 2 other films that speaks about our queer futurity and many other discussions we'll be holding. So thank you to the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies at Harvard, and to each one of you attendees that came here today. I really appreciate your presence, and thank you everyone for making this possible. Danette, Marcela, Paola, Laura, Jorge, thank you everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.